The ranch sat alone under a sky that never cared. Red soil stretched in every direction, broken only by dry grass and old fence posts. No cities, no neighbors, no roads that mattered. Just wind, dust, and silence. The man who lived there was named Eli Carter. Once, he had been human in every way that counted. Born on Earth, raised among noise and people in hope. He had laughed loudly back then, trusted easily, believed that sacrifice was always rewarded. That version of Eli during a border war no one remembered anymore. The galaxy now listed him as former human. Not an insult, just a category. His bones were metal. His lungs were printed. His heart beat because a machine told it to. He was alive, but officially incomplete. After the war, the medals came first. Then the handshakes. Then the silence. Eli sold what little he had left and bought a forgotten piece of land on a forgotten world. A ranch meant for settlers who never arrived. It was cheap because no one wanted it. Eli wanted it because it was empty. For 9 long years, he lived alone. He woke before sunrise, fed animals that did not ask questions, fixed fences that kept nothing out except memories. At night, he watched the stars and tried not to count how many friends were buried under them. He did not hate people. He was just tired of being left behind. That night began like every other, quiet, predictable, safe. Then the perimeter alarm screamed. Eli froze. Nothing came out here. No traders. No patrols. No refugees. Anyone with sense avoided this sector. He reached for his rifle without thinking. Old habits never really died. His artificial fingers closed around the grip as his internal systems scanned the horizon. 11 heat. Signatures, weak, unsteady, too slow to be soldiers. Eli frowned. He stepped onto the porch as moonlight washed over the dirt road leading to his gate. Shapes moved there. Thin shapes. Bent shapes. They stopped at the fence. Then they knelt. Eli lowered the rifle a little. They were not human. Their skin carried soft patterns like carved stone. Their eyes were large and dark, reflecting fear and exhaustion. Long black cloth wrapped their bodies, torn and dusty, marked with symbols of mourning. Alien women. One of them crawled forward until the fence pressed against her forehead. She lifted her face, trembling. "Please," she said, her voice shaking as the translator struggled. "We have walked for 3 days. We have no food left." Eli said nothing. Behind her, small shapes shifted. Children, hiding behind thin legs that could barely hold themselves up. The woman swallowed hard. "Mates are dead," she continued. "Our homes are ash. We ask only for a place to rest. Just one night." Eli's chest tightened. He had heard those words before. Different mouths. Same pain. The logical choice was simple. Turn them away. The Empire hunted refugees like these. Anyone sheltering them became a target. Eli had chosen this life to avoid that kind of attention. His sensors showed dehydration, malnutrition, fear. Levels so high it hurt to look at. One child peeked around her mother's leg and stared at Eli with wide eyes. No hatred. No demand. Just hope. Eli's hand shook. He remembered a battlefield far away. Remembered lying broken in the dirt while voices argued whether saving him was worth the cost. Someone had decided it was. He exhaled slowly. The gate creaked as it opened. "Come in," Eli said quietly. "There's water, shelter, nothing more promised." The women bowed their heads. Some cried without sound. The children followed, clutching scraps of cloth and each other. As they passed him, Eli felt something unfamiliar stir in his chest. Not fear, not anger. Responsibility. That night, as alien widows slept in his barn and children breathed softly under borrowed blankets, Eli Carter sat alone on his porch with his rifle across his knees. for the first time in 9 years. The silence around the ranch felt different. It no longer felt empty. It felt like it was waiting. The morning sun burned weakly through the red dust, casting long shadows across Eli's ranch. The barn smelled of hay and sweat and something new hope. 11 alien widows and 7 children stirred inside, waking slowly. Their bodies were thin, muscles trembling from hunger, but they moved with quiet determination. Each step carried the weight of loss, yet also the fragile courage of survival. Eli walked among them, keeping distance. His metal limbs creaked softly as he moved. He had never been good with people, let alone a group like this. Yet he watched, silent, as they began to clean the barn. They swept the floors, stacked old crates, and gathered straw for bedding. Each action was careful, deliberate, as if even their smallest movements mattered. One woman, the one who had spoken first the night before, worked slower than the others. Her name was Sail, or so the translator said. She had skin the color of pale copper and eyes so dark they seemed bottomless. She moved with a grace that belied her exhaustion, but Eli could see the tremor in her hands. She did not look at him often, only when necessary. Her children clung to her skirts, whispering softly in a language Eli barely understood. Over breakfast, Eli placed bowls of water and warm gruel before them. They ate quietly. No words, just the sound of utensils against bowls and small sighs of relief as food met empty stomachs. Eli watched them, sensing the weight of their story, though he had not yet heard all of it. Later, Sail finally spoke to him alone, outside the barn. "We are called Cathari," she said. "We farm. We build. We live quietly. Until our men were taken. They promised protection. They promised strength. But they sent our husbands to die." Her voice cracked. "We escaped, only to find the stars as empty as our hearts." Eli did not answer. He had no words that could soothe her. He only nodded, understanding too well what it meant to be left behind. He had chosen silence for years, hoping it would erase the memory of a past filled with blood and mistakes. Yet hearing her story stirred something he had buried long ago, a desire to act. Even when there was risk, the children wandered the yard, curious but cautious. Eli watched one small boy chase a mechanical goat that had been repaired weeks ago. The goat bucked and spun, and the boy laughed, a sound so fragile and bright it made Eli's chest tighten. He had not heard laughter in years. He had almost forgotten it existed. As the day passed, the widows worked tirelessly. They fixed broken fence posts, mended animal pens, and even began planting small patches of grain. They moved not because Eli asked, but because they could not bear to do nothing. In their careful, quiet way, they were rebuilding a world that had been taken from them. At night, around a fire in the barnyard, Sail spoke again. "You are alone like us," she said softly, her voice carrying the weight of her grief. "But you pretend it does not hurt." Eli stared into the flames. He had tried pretending for 9 years. The emptiness of the ranch had been a shield. "I stopped pretending years ago," he said, his voice low. She shook her head. "No, you stopped hoping. You hide your heart." The words lingered in the air. Eli wanted to argue, to push them away, to go back to silence. But he could not. The pain in her voice mirrored his own. He had built walls around himself, but these widows had walked through them without knocking. For the first time in years, he felt responsibility, not as a human, not as a former soldier, not as a machine-enhanced body, but as someone who could choose to protect. The barn was no longer just a shelter for animals. It was becoming a home. As the stars emerged, cold and indifferent above the desert sky, Eli looked at the 11 widows tending their children. He realized that the quiet strength in them reminded him of the courage he'd once admired in humanity. Not in governments or armies, not in medals or promises, but in simple acts of survival. And in that quiet moment, The ranch itself seemed to breathe. Dust swirled in the firelight. Wooden beams groaned under the weight of history and hope. The wind carried the soft whispers of a new beginning. Eli did not speak. He only watched, silently acknowledging that life had arrived at his doorstep, in a form he had not expected, but perhaps exactly what he had been waiting for. The ranch was no longer empty. And Eli, for the first time in nearly a decade, felt the weight of connection stirring inside his chest, a feeling he had thought lost forever. Weeks passed, and the ranch began to change. The air, once heavy with dust and silence, now carried the faint smell of cooked food, freshly tilled soil, and hay rearranged with care. Animals that had grown lonely for years now had new companions. Chickens pecked around alien children's feet, curious and cautious. Goats nuzzled their small hands, sensing the gentleness in them. Even the old mechanical tractor seemed to hum a little brighter, as if the ranch itself recognized that life had returned. Eli watched from the porch most mornings. His eyes, partially human, partially machine, followed every movement. He still carried distance in his posture, the habit of solitude etched into his spine. Yet, every time a child laughed or a widow offered a small smile, he felt something unfamiliar but warm stirring inside him. Sale had grown bolder. She taught the other widows ways to organize chores efficiently, combining Cathari farming techniques with what little human knowledge Eli had left. They worked from sunrise to sunset, not because he commanded it, but because the act of working, of rebuilding, healed them. Eli sometimes helped, repairing fences, fixing broken tools, and teaching the children how to ride the old goats and mechanical carts. One afternoon, Eli found himself in the barn with Sale alone. She was mending a torn blanket, her hands moving with precision and care. "You could leave us here." "Alone," she said softly, her voice carrying a gentle sadness. "No one would blame you. You've spent years alone. Why do you stay?" Eli paused, looking at the sunlight streaming through the barn slats. He had asked himself the same question many nights. He had chosen solitude for a reason: to forget, to protect himself from loss. But looking at her, at the others, he realized that solitude had also been loneliness. And loneliness had become its own cage. "I stay," he said finally, his voice quiet, "because no one else should have to be abandoned like I was." Sale nodded. She did not speak, but her eyes softened. The children, sensing the unspoken connection, ran past them laughing, chasing a goat that bucked and spun across the yard. Eli allowed himself a small smile. The sound was fragile but powerful, and it tugged at a part of him he had thought dead. The widows began planting more than just vegetables. They started small orchards, rows of fruit and herbs along the edges of the ranch. They repaired old barns, cleared dead trees, and even began constructing small homes for themselves with Eli's guidance. Their work was quiet, steady, and full of dignity. Eli realized that these women, these widows of war, were teaching him something he had forgotten: patience, hope, and resilience. At night, around the fire, the ranch was alive in ways it hadn't been for years. Children slept nearby, huddled for warmth. The widows told stories in soft melodic voices, tales of home, of lost friends, and of dreams that refused to die. L.A. listened, sometimes offering advice or a word of comfort, though he rarely spoke much. Words felt fragile, but their presence mattered. One evening, as the twin moons rose above the horizon, Sale approached him again. "You've given us this place," she said softly. "You could have turned away, and yet you stayed. Why?" Eli's gaze lingered on the horizon. For years, he had measured life in survival, in machines repaired and fences fixed. But now he measured it differently. He measured it in small hands brushing against his, in laughter breaking the heavy silence, in trust slowly rebuilt. "I stayed," he said finally, "because someone has to care when the universe forgets." The wind whispered through the trees, carrying the faint smell of crops and hay. Somewhere a goat bleated and a child laughed in reply. The ranch was no longer just land. It was living, breathing proof that life could return even after devastation. Eli stood, letting the quiet strength of the widows and children wash over him. For the first time in years, he felt a tether to something larger than himself, a home, a family, a purpose beyond survival. And for the first time, he allowed himself to hope that the silence of his past had finally been broken. The ranch had begun to breathe again, and Eli knew, deep in his chest, that it would never be silent again. The quiet on the ranch did not last forever. Eli had known it was temporary, that peace in the borderlands was always borrowed. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in blood-red streaks, the sensors on his perimeter flashed an unknown ship descending from orbit. The Empire had found them. The widows sensed the tension immediately. Children clung to their mothers, whispering in the soft melodic Kithari language that Eli had begun to understand. Sale's hands shook as she gathered the children close, but her eyes were steady. She had survived horrors worse than fear itself, and now she faced it again. Eli stepped forward, his metal limbs reflecting the fading light. He had expected this moment. He had trained for it once in another life. But back then, he had fought with orders, with commands, with the certainty of a mission. Now he fought for people who were no longer strangers. They were family, in the only way that mattered. The Empire's patrol ship landed with a dull thud, sending clouds of red dust into the air. Soldiers emerged, armored and armed, their voices cold and commanding. "This property is unregistered," the lead officer barked. "Hand over the refugees. You are harboring criminals." Eli's chest rose and fell steadily. "You are welcome to leave," he said, voice calm but firm. "These people stay." Laughter, sharp and cruel, came from the soldiers. "And who are you? A former human hiding in the dust? You cannot stop us." Eli smiled faintly. Former human did not mean weak. He had learned that the hard way. With a single motion, his coat fell open, revealing the metal and circuitry beneath his skin. Hydraulic limbs flexed, and his eyes glowed faintly with systems powering up. "I can," he said. The battle began quickly. Elim moved with precision, using tools meant for work and survival. A pitchfork became a lever to disarm a soldier. A rope tied to a post sent one sprawling. Explosions and smoke filled the barnyard, but the widows did not hide. They carried water, medical supplies, and even ammunition, assisting him in ways he had never imagined. Their courage was quiet, but fierce. The children huddled behind haystacks, but Eli could see their eyes shining with awe and fear. One small girl peeked around a corner, clutching a doll. Eli's heart tightened, but he did not falter. He moved for them, not for glory, but because someone had to stand when the universe said no. Hours passed. The dust settled. When the sun rose again, the Empire's patrol ship smoldered, half buried in dirt. The remaining soldiers fled, leaving behind their weapons and fear. The ranch was scarred, burned in places, but it still stood. Sale approached him cautiously, eyes wide. Why did you fight like that? You could have left us. We would have understood." Eli knelt, placing a hand on her shoulder. The metal fingers were cold, but the gesture was gentle. "Because someone once stood for me," he said, voice low. "And I will not forget. Not again." The widows gathered around him, and even the children, still wary, touched his coat, his arms, his mechanical hands. Eli felt the weight of their trust settle on him. It was heavier than any weapon, stronger than any armor dot. By the time the Empire realized the ranch was not theirs, Eli and the widows had already rebuilt makeshift barricades. The children laughed softly again, chasing each other around the barn while the adults worked quietly, calmly, as if nothing had happened. Eli knew this was only the beginning. The Empire would remember, and they would come again. But he no longer felt fear. The ranch was more than land, more than soil and fences. It was life, and life, when protected, fought back harder than any weapon. That night, Eli sat alone on the porch once more, rifle across his knees. But this time, he did not feel the cold emptiness he had grown used to. The ranch was alive with whispered laughter, with soft footsteps in the barn, with hope. And for the first time, Eli knew that he was not standing alone. The Empire had returned, but the ranch and its new family would stand taller. The battle had left the ranch wounded. Smoke still curled from the scorched earth where the Empire ship had crashed. Fences were broken, water troughs overturned, and the barn's roof sagged from damage. Eli moved through the ruins, each step measured, each breath heavy. His mechanical body worked tirelessly, but he could feel the strain. Systems beeped warnings. Joints ached. Internal processors warned of overheating. He had given everything to protect the widows and children. The widows moved quietly among the ruins. Sail guided them, comforting children, collecting what remained of their belongings, and helping rebuild small shelters from debris. Their grief was raw, yet tempered by determination. Even after witnessing death and destruction, they refused to retreat. Their resilience both humbled and frightened Eli. He realized that he had never truly understood strength until he saw them carry it quietly. Day after day, Eli tended to his injuries and repaired his limbs as best he could. But he knew this life of protection would cost him. Every system reboot reminded him that he was no longer entirely human. Every drop of oil that replaced blood reminded him of the sacrifices he had made long ago and the sacrifices yet to come. The children tried to help, offering small hands to carry tools or fetch water. Eli smiled faintly at their courage, even as he shook his head. "Stay close," he said, voice gentle. "Some tools are dangerous for small hands." Yet he secretly felt pride. Their laughter, though hesitant, was beginning to fill the air like wind through new leaves. By evening, the survivors gathered near the barn. Sail looked at Eli, her expression a mixture of gratitude and worry. "We will leave," she said softly. "You have given us life. We cannot ask for more." Eli looked at the children clustered around her. Their small faces reflected innocence and trust. He wanted to speak, to tell her that he did not ask for anything in return, that this protecting them was his purpose now. But no words came. The lump in his throat was heavy with emotion. He felt the weight of responsibility, the weight of survival, and the cost of standing up when everyone else had turned away. Sail stepped closer, placing a hand on his arm. "We can help," she said. "Let us work together. Let us make this place strong again. You do not have to carry it alone." Eli exhaled slowly. For years, he had carried the world's weight alone. He had thought solitude was protection. Now he saw that protection could be shared. The ranch, these women, these children, they were part of something greater than his own survival. That night, he sat by the fire, his body tired but alive. The flames flickered against his metal frame, reflecting in eyes that had seen too much war and death. He watched the children play quietly with small toys, their laughter soft but persistent. The widows whispered plans for rebuilding the barn and reinforcing the perimeter. Every whispered word was a promise of resilience, of life refusing to be extinguished. Eli felt a strange warmth inside, a mixture of exhaustion, pride, and something he had not felt in years, hope. He had given up expecting anything from the universe. Yet here it had delivered something unexpected. People who needed him, and who allowed him to need them back. He understood now that the cost of standing was high. His body would never fully recover. His solitude was gone forever. The Empire would return, and the dangers would not end. But the price was worth it. Worth every aching joint, every scar, Every sleepless night, because standing meant more than survival. It meant life. It meant hope. And in that quiet moment, as firelight danced across the ranch and soft voices filled the night, Eli Carter allowed himself to believe that he could endure anything. As long as he did not endure it alone, the ranch had been tested, and it had survived. Months passed, and the ranch transformed in ways Eli had never imagined. Dusty fields became green patches of crops, tilled and tended by the widows with careful hands. The barn was repaired and expanded, providing warm shelter for the children and a space for the women to cook, teach, and care for each other. Even the mechanical tractor, once neglected and rusty, hummed as it plowed the soil. As if it understood it had a purpose again, the widows worked together seamlessly. Each had skills Eli could only watch in awe. They built small shelters along the edge of the property, fixed broken water pumps, and made the ranch livable not only for survival but for comfort. Sale became the natural leader, her voice gentle but commanding, guiding both widows and children with a calm authority that Eli had rarely seen in humans or aliens alike. The children learned quickly. They rode goats, chased chickens, carried water buckets, and helped plant crops. Eli taught them simple things, how to use tools safely, how to care for the animals, but the widows taught them life. They taught courage, patience, and hope. Slowly, laughter began to fill the air, replacing the echoes of silence that had dominated the ranch for so many years. Eli found himself smiling more, laughing occasionally at the children's antics. He still rose before sunrise, still repaired fences and machinery, but he no longer felt the heavy weight of isolation. In the quiet moments of the day, he would watch Sale teaching the children words in Kethari and trade speech, helping them share their thoughts and dreams. Sometimes he caught her glance and saw the same warmth reflected in her eyes that he felt creeping into his own heart. Trade. Caravans began to arrive again. Rumors of a safe refuge beyond imperial control spread, and other travelers, refugees and wanderers came seeking shelter. Eli did not turn them away. He had learned that survival alone was not enough. Life required community, trust, and sacrifice. The ranch was no longer just his. It belonged to everyone who had found safety there. At night, around the fire, stories were shared. Sale recounted the history of the Cathari people, tales of lost homes and brave deeds, while Eli listened quietly, occasionally adding a few words about Earth and the wars he had witnessed. The children sat close, eyes wide, absorbing every word. They asked questions about courage and family, about why people hurt each other and why some still stood to protect. Eli answered as best he could, realizing that teaching them was not just about knowledge, it was about hope. The Empire's threats remained in the back of his mind. He repaired defenses, monitored sensors, and trained the widows in basic protection techniques. But fear no longer ruled his decisions. The ranch was alive, resilient, and full of people who could stand beside him. Even the widows, once fragile and broken, now exuded quiet strength. They were not just survivors, they were builders, fighters, and protectors in their own right. One evening, as the twin moons rose high above the desert sky, Eli stood at the edge of the fields, watching the children play and the widows tending the crops. Sale approached him quietly, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You've given us this place," she said softly. "And in return, we've given you something you thought lost." Eli did not speak at first. Words felt small against the depth of feeling in that moment. He looked around, the laughter, the movement, the sense of life, and understood that the ranch had become more than shelter. It was a family, a home, a place where courage, love, and hope could grow despite the scars of the past. I never expected this," he said finally, his voice rough with emotion. "I thought I had nothing left to give." Sale smiled. "You did not need to give," she said. "You only needed to open the door. We built the rest with you." Eli felt a weight lift from his chest, a burden he had carried for years. He realized that he no longer feared solitude or silence. The ranch was full of life, of laughter, of trust. And in that fullness, Eli found peace. For the first time in nearly a decade, he allowed himself to imagine a future not just of survival, but of thriving, a future where he was not alone, a future where the ranch, the widows, the children, and even he could heal together. The ranch was alive, and so was Eli Carter's heart. Years passed, and the ranch stood strong. What had once been a lonely outpost on a forgotten world had grown into a thriving refuge. Crops swayed in orderly rows under the twin suns, animals roamed freely, and laughter echoed across the fields. The children, now older, ran and played without fear. The widows had rebuilt not only their lives but the ranch itself. Each act of labor, a quiet declaration that life could persist even after tragedy. Eli watched it all from the porch. The familiar weight of solitude replaced by something richer connection. He had thought he had nothing left to give, that the scars in his body and heart made him unworthy of companionship. But these people, these aliens he had sheltered, had shown him a truth that no medal, no title, and no battle ever could. Humanity was not about flesh alone. It was about courage, compassion, and the will to protect life when the universe said no one deserved it. Even when travelers came from distant systems, seeking shelter from war or starvation, the ranch welcomed them. Eli and the widows worked together, guiding newcomers, teaching them skills, showing them the quiet strength of a community that refused to leave anyone behind. The Empire had long since stopped sending patrols. Perhaps they feared this stubborn human and his alien family. Or perhaps they had learned that some things could not be conquered by force alone. One evening, Eli walked through the orchard, watching the wind ripple through the trees. Sale approached him, carrying one of the youngest children in her arms. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked quietly. "Opening the gate that night?" Eli shook his head slowly. "No," he said. "I thought I was saving you. But you've saved me too. I thought I was giving hope, but you've shown me what it truly is." The children ran past them, laughing and shouting, a blur of energy and life. The widows worked nearby, their hands in the soil, planting the next season's crops. Eli felt a deep swell in his chest. He understood in that moment that the ranch was more than a home. It was a living symbol of resilience. Every brick repaired, every seed planted, every life saved was a testament to the strength of those who refused to bow to despair. Historians and travelers would later write about the ranch. They would tell the story of a former human who lived alone for years until 11 alien widows begged for shelter, and in doing so, transformed the barren land into a sanctuary. They would speak of courage and sacrifice, of the quiet determination that created life where there had been only death. But Eli never cared for fame or recognition. The reward was in the daily life around him, the laughter of children, the smiles of the widows, the rustle of crops in the wind. One night, as the stars sparkled coldly over the desert, Eli sat on his porch, Sale beside him. "What are we?" he asked quietly, gesturing to the ranch and all it contained. "Humans? Cathari? Or something new?" Sale smiled softly, resting her hand on his metal arm. "We are something better," she said. "Not defined by species, but by what we do for each other. By the courage to open our doors when no one else would. That is what makes us human. And more." Eli nodded, looking out at the fields, the barns, the children sleeping in their small homes, the widows tending the last fire. The galaxy might call him a former human, and technically he was. But he felt more alive than he had in decades. He had learned that humanity was not in the body, but in the choices made to protect, to nurture, and to hope. As dawn approached, light spilling over the desert, Eli felt the ranch breathe around him, alive with life and laughter. He realized that in protecting others, he had found himself again. In opening his gate, he had opened his heart. In surviving, he had truly lived. The ranch had become a beacon, a home, a family, a proof that even in the cold, indifferent universe, courage, hope, and compassion could shine brighter than any star. And somewhere in that quiet vastness, across systems and worlds, beings whispered the story of a former human who refused to leave widows to die alone, a story of resilience, love, and the truest meaning of humanity. HFY.